Hello, everyone. This is Communication Research Methods, and we're doing week 3 together in our lecture. This is Bram Duffee, and I want to welcome you to today's lecture on the data and research methods. And so we have a lot of definitions that come out of this chapter and what we're discussing right now. And I just want to remind you to not be overwhelmed, but to try to take it a piece at a time. And think of it as learning a new language because you're learning about a new field. And as you learn about some of these important terms and how the research process works within the middle of all that, there are different ways that you can learn. And one of the ways that I have incorporated is by using flashcards. And sometimes flashcards help me be able to remember the definitions of something. And then just because I remember the definition of it, maybe I don't do a good job of applying it or understanding it until later. And so we have to recognize that because we're in week 3, that some of that is what we'll be experiencing together, because not all of what we talk about will connect right away immediately. But we're going to inch towards that and work towards that. And it does require both of us to make effort. And part of that is to think about the definitions of these things, okay? Because we are involving our world now in communication and research. And to begin with, I want to think about what we mean by the word data, okay? So data refers to information collected in a manner that's really systematic. And it can be either numeric, like your GPA, right? Or it can be something non-numeric, like your favorite movie quote. But it's essential to recognize that there are different types of data that we typically encounter. So we're going to talk about some of those types of data, like texts and observations and self-reports. And so let's get into those. The first one I want to say is text. All right, text can include anything from a written essay that you submit in class to a podcast that you listen to on your way to school. So text, T-E-X-T-S, texts, things that you read, are analyzed, and we refer to them as such. All right. Observation data is the next thing. Things that are considered an observation would be like if you're sitting in a campus coffee shop and watching how people interact and writing down behaviors and patterns. So this simple thing of observing, this is pulling in data, just like texts are pulling in data, things that you are bringing into your environment to understand. Another thing to mention are self-reports. Self-reports occur when you fill out a survey about your study habits or provide information about your own behavior. And so self-reports are really common, and I'm sure that you participate in this stuff in your own life commonly. But in addition to self-reports, there are other kinds of reportings that happen in research. Another kind of reporting might be like if your roommate was asked to describe your study habits on your behalf. So this would be a type of data that would be giving a different perspective. And these types of data are what we refer to when we use the big word data. We're pulling in information, right? So far we've talked about the kinds of data might be text, or things that we observe, or things that we report about ourselves, or that other people report about the situations. So moving on, sampling is something that is crucial, because to create a sample that best represents the population means that we can generalize our findings. When we sample something, it's just like taking a taste of it, right? And does that one taste taste like the rest of what's there? That's what you're trying to figure out. You're trying to figure out if you can generalize that information. And so generalizing involves something special, okay? It involves making inferences about the entire population that you're studying. So, for instance, if you want to go and uh, check out your favorite dining option among other students, then you might survey a group, but based on that size of the group, how do you make claims about everybody's preferences? It's difficult. We have to make sure that since you're not able to survey everyone, that the information that you are kicking out there is generalizable, right? So what would make it not generalizable? Maybe you're picking people who are normally at a particular part of the campus, so they normally go to a particular restaurant. Or maybe you're picking people on a certain day, and based on that day, food is really good at another one, right? So we have to be able to generalize. One another important part of this is called the central limit theory, okay? So this central limit theory is a foundational concept here. It really suggests that under normal conditions, that data from larger samples tend to be more normally distributed. It resembles like a bell curve. That means the more students that you ask, the greater the likelihood that your sample is the sample that you get, the information that you get, will represent the true preferences of the whole students that are available, right? So random selection is key for a representative sample. So it's sort of like drawing names out of a hat to pick a different team member to make sure that everyone has an equal chance of being selected. Without random selection, the error margin can be such that you aren't giving good information. And so you don't want to just survey your immediate friends and family to get the full picture of something, right? And similarly, there are various kinds of sampling methods out there. Like random sampling and non-random sampling. But in random sampling, it's a way that ensures that in each case, the population has an equal chance of being included. So it's like assigning every student a number and using a random generator to select the participants. And a way, what you do is you have to deal with the sample size that you have. And based on what you've been given, work to make sure that the information that you're going to be getting out of that sample is going to be realistic as far as showing good results that aren't biased, that aren't skewed, right? So ways that we can think about that are some of these other sampling methods. So one of those methods is called systematic sampling. And systematic sampling involves choosing a starting point randomly and then including every so many few after that. And so you're going to do something like stand at the campus entrance at 9 o'clock and then ask every 10th person who walks by what their favorite campus activity is. So in doing that, you've decided from the start that the person that's going to get asked is person number 10, not person 8 or 4 because they look cool or different or meet a certain criteria that's different. You're looking at this type of sampling for a reason. Same thing for stratified sampling. There's a type of sampling that's used that is used to identify mutually exclusive groups. So when you divide a sample into these groups and then randomly pick from each, it means that groups like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior are represented more in your survey. So stratified sampling means that you are identifying groups and picking from groups so that you can get a correct representation. Another kind of sampling that is fun to remember. I remember this because I saw it in a cartoon once that about research. But snowball sampling is something that starts out with you asking a few people in your life, and then based on your talk with those folks, you get referred to other folks. So you might be giving a quick interview, and you, at the end of the interview, you say, based on the things that we've talked about, who else is interested in this? Who else would be good for me to talk to about this topic? And then that person would hand over the next person, and so you get a lot of your sampling through referrals. So that's good if you want to do something like an expert information, right? So if you are looking for an expert in that area, and you say, who else is good to talk to? Well, a referral from an expert is comes with some positive there are positive parts that come with that, because you automatically know that an expert says, hey, this is another expert. And so this kind of referral causes the snowball effect. There's another kind of sampling that's called purposive sampling. It's similar, but it targets specific groups. So purposive sampling is like if you were going to target only international students, because you were trying to understand their unique experiences. So these kinds of samplings help us make sure that we're getting the information that we need at the end. And so, gosh, where are we getting data? Common sources include archival research, so things in the past, so looking at past surveys conducted by folks, field studies like anthropology class that might observe a cultural event on campus, a laboratory setting where psychology experiments might take place. Understanding the conceptual and operational definitions of research is vital. And conceptual definitions are just kind of like definitions that come from a dictionary, and based on previous research to create agreed upon understanding of a concept. Like if there was a general idea of student engagement, but that's conceptual definitions. Operational definitions explain the methods, the procedures, the variables, the instruments that are used to measure these concepts, and they sort of act as rules. So one thing is more about looking at what something is, and another is more about how the operation affects things. And so let's look at how we measure things in research, because when we look at how to measure, there are lots of different ways to criticize information and pull in information, and there are 4 of them that are pretty critical for basic understanding. And you probably already understand some of these ways of thinking about data, but maybe you just don't have the name attached to it. The first one I want to mention is nominal data. Nominal data, well, this is the most basic level of measurement. It involves characterizing data into distinct, mutually exclusive groups where no numerical or ordered relationship exists between the groups. So, for example, if you were going to look at how college students might be grouped into their favorite pizza topping, cheese, pepperoni, or vegetable, and you look at that by their college major, like biology, history, or engineering, in both cases, you're just assigning labels without implying any kind of rank or order among them. It's like organizing a playlist where each song belongs to a different genre, but these genres themselves don't have a hierarchy. All right, so that's nominal data, which is characterizing data into distinct groups that don't have ordered relationships. The next definition I want to mention is ordinal data. And ordinal data is something that introduces a sense of order among the categories. So it's sort of the opposite. And while the exact differences between the categories are not necessarily known, they can be ranked. So just like imagine a college sports tournament where teams are ranked between each other based on performance, like first, second, and third place. And just kind of like that, you could consider your class standings, like freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, where there's a clear progression. But the intervals between these stages aren't uniform. So it's like rating movies from 1 to 5 stars is another example where you express a preference order without really specifying the exact difference in enjoyment level between the star levels that are put out there. So that's ordinal data, which is a sense of order among the categories, but the exact differences aren't known. And ordinal data is different than interval data, which is the next term. Interval data takes this step further by not only ranking data, but also ensures that there are differences between categories are meaningful and equal. So a good example of interval data is temperature between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius. It's just that there's a difference here when we talk about units. If we think about the difference between 20 and 30 degrees, and that being the same as 30 and 40 degrees, it just makes it possible to talk about temperatures that are in constant units that are of consistency. But if you have interval data that lacks a true 0 point, 0 degrees doesn't mean the absence of temperature. So similarly, standardized test scores like the SAT are going to operate on an interval scale where the intervals between the scores are consistent, but there's no true 0 that signifies the absence of the ability or knowledge. So that's interval data that lets you be able to have ranking to data, but also ensures that those differences are meaningful. The next definition is ratio data. This is the most informative level of measurements because it incorporates all the features of interval data and it includes a meaningful 0 point. And this allows for statements on how much more that one object might possess a certain characteristic over another object that has a different characteristic. So we consider measuring the time that you spend studying each week. We could think of, 0 hours means no study, and that you could say 4 hours is twice as much as 2 hours. So these kinds of abilities to compare information is what we have when we have ratio kinds of data. So another example is the distance in running. If you think about how far you run during a track event, if one athlete runs 200 meters and then another runs 100 meters, then you can accurately describe the first distance by saying, hey, the first one is twice as the second. And it's all possible because there's a 0 point there. And that 0 point allows you to look at things based on ratio. So by understanding and utilizing these different levels of measurement, we can more effectively categorize, analyze, and interpret data in research that comes to us in everyday scenarios. And each level provides a different depth of information. And this helps us make informed decisions and draw meaningful conclusions. And so what we can do is look at the data that we have and based on the data, decide how we can how we can organize that data. And so in some cases, setting up that data in a particular way helps you with accurate understandings of the ratio, of the interval, of the data that's being shared. So I want to bring up the fact next that when we talk about social science research, there are warrants out there that help us think about providing information in research that is accurate. And there are these warrants that we'll talk about today, like precision and power and reliability and validity. You may have heard those terms. They're all crucial. And to begin with, precision is a term that we think about. Gosh, how perfect is something? How close to accurate can we get it? Precision relates to how accurate you can describe or show off the variable that you're investigating. So it's like if you ensure that your GPS coordinates are spot on, when you're trying to find a new place. This is the way that we, make our approach. The next word to pull out is reliability. And reliability ensures that instruments perform consistently over time. And it's through factors like data entry errors or instrument confusion that can affect this. So to determine reliability, methods include intercoder reliability, alternate forms or test-retest, and internal consistency that all can help to make sure that the study that you're providing is a reliable representation of the data. So intercoder reliability measures the agreement among coders. So it uses statistical tools and it works to ensure that all the group project members agree on the same thing, or the folks that are being studied agree on the same thing. And alternative forms involve using different instruments to measure the same trait. And they might use, for example, a smartphone app might be used to track steps. And that would be a good example of test-retest, where you can measure the same, you could administer the same measures at different times to check the stability of that. And that's similar to taking practice exams. If you take practice exams, you're going to ensure that there's a consistent performance. And internal consistency is another thing that helps us with reliability. And internal consistency looks for consistency in the responses between responses across a measured item, like ensuring that all questions on a survey about study habits align with each other. So reliability is something that is not determined necessarily based on numbers, but it's based on a form of checks and balances within the information that you have. Validity is the next term I want to share with you. And validity asks whether a measure truly captures what it intends to capture. So trying to figure out if you are using information that you need to use is another way of thinking about this whole validity. And there are three types of validity. And there's content, construct, and criteria related validity. Content validity ensures that a scale can capture all the aspects of a trait. And it's kind of like having an instructor review your research paper to make sure it has all the necessary topics covered. It's that content is saying, hey, what's in there? Construct, C-O-N-S-T-R-U-C-T, construct validity is different because it examines how well a scale measures everything. So it's kind of like evaluating whether a personality test reflects your traits or not. So these different aspects of validity help us make sure that we are measuring what we truly intend to measure. Another type of validity is concurrent validity. And that's like if you were going to check to see if your current GPA lines up with your academic performance that's expected. It's kind of like using your SAT scores to forecast your college success. When we do research, there are these interpretive warrants that we use that emphasize a worthy topic and help us be able to, see if something's worth studying. And one of those things is being able to evaluate and look at rigor. And you can see we have our next term come up. Rigor involves the appropriate theory, the adequate field time, and the collection techniques. It makes sure that your study is as thorough and well prepared as it can be. So how strong are you working towards this? Credibility is the next term I want to mention, because credibility shows your dependability on conveying the reality. And it's kind of like being a reliable source of information in a group discussion. You want to use things that illustrate points and show compelling evidence. So are you that reliable source of information? Do you have credibility? So that helps us think about how we can build upon different aspects of research. And I have two final terms to kick off with you, because I think that it helps us understand another dimension, another direction in research, and that is moral relativism. Moral relativism in research is something that acknowledges that ethical standards and cultural norms can vary significantly across different societies and different communities. And for example, a study conducted on communication styles might need to consider how directness is perceived differently in different cultures. In some cultures, direct communication is valued, while in others it might be seen as impolite. So by understanding and respecting these differences, researchers can design studies that are sensitive to the cultural context of their participants. It's a lot like how a global marketing campaign would tailor its message to resonate with diverse audiences. Or if you were going to ask truck drivers to go into an interview with you and you are wearing a suit, they're going to see you as kind of out there, right? Instead of being dressed more like them. So there's a way of thinking about how research works to push away their own bias. And I want to end with that, because reflexivity is something that requires researchers to be aware of their own biases and the influence that the researcher has on their own research. We have to know that there's a continuous process of self-reflection that happens during the time that you're conducting the research process. So if you are studying social media, well, your own social media usage has to be considered, and your own habits and your own attitudes towards social media have to be considered when you're the one that's interpreting the data. So it's kind of like if you have a debate whether if someone's biases can lead to a more balanced or fair argument. So it's for this reflexivity to happen, it means that the researcher has to be able to describe their position, describe where they're coming from. And by incorporating these kinds of warrants and these kinds of approaches, we are beginning to learn more about the research process and some of the key things that are involved with how we grow a project, how we deal with data, and what we call and label some of the more important things in the research development.